So the whole debate started with a discussion about the unprecedented nature of asking Israel to return lands at all, but Goldberg, Carrigan, Lyndon Johnson, our Secretary of State, all came to the conclusion that this was an opportunity to exchange land for peace. But it was clearly an exchange of land for peace, not simply a return of land because, as the United Nations resolution did contain a sentence that it was wrong to acquire land through warfare. That was only part of the preliminary statement. The text of the resolution itself was very clear. It required the returning of territories, we'll get to that in a minute, not all territories, not good territories, but only after peace was achieved and recognized and secure boundaries were accepted. Under the resolution, Israel was not required to return an inch of land in the absence of peace between the Arab states and Israel. It was not required to return an inch of land until such time as secure and recognized boundaries were acknowledged by all the belligerents, including Egypt and Jordan. And as everybody well recalls, shortly after the enactment of Resolution 242, which Israel immediately accepted, indeed it had indicated through the ambassador to the United Nations and the ambassador to the United States from Israel that it was willing to accept the resolution. Immediately thereafter, the Arab nations gathered at Khartoum and issued their famous 3 no's: no peace, no recognition, no negotiation. That is, they rejected Resolution 242 categorically and unequivocally, and Israel accepted it. Just a parenthetical, if one were to read the entire text of Jimmy Carter's malicious and mendacious book, recently published, you would see no reference to the fact that Israel accepted and the Arab states rejected 242. The entire thesis of Carter's benighted and erroneous book is that Israel has rejected Resolution 242 and the Arab states and the Palestinians have accepted it. The Palestinians, in addition to going to Khartoum and participating in the famous 3 no's, responded to 242 by the Palestinian Charter, which rejected Israel's right to exist, rejected any boundaries, any borders. So at that point in time, Israel was not legally obliged by international law or by United Nations Security Council Resolution 242 to return any land at all. In fact, it was Eugene Rostow, I think his name was referred to previously, who indicated that under international law there was no obligation to return any of that land, and even Secretary of State Rogers, who was not Israel's closest friend, said as follows: "We have never suggested any withdrawal until there was a final binding written agreement that satisfied all aspects of the Security Council resolution. In other words, we have never suggested that a withdrawal occur before there was a contractual agreement entered into by the parties, signed by the parties, in each other's presence, an agreement that would provide full assurances to Israel that the Arabs would admit that Israel had a right to exist in peace." That didn't come, of course, has still not come, but it didn't come even in part until Egypt made peace with Israel, at which time Israel complied with its obligations under 242 and returned literally more than it was obliged to all of the territories. When Israel made peace with Jordan, at that point Jordan had turned over its sovereignty or its control over the territories to Palestinians. But the small amount of land that was still in dispute, that was not part of the Palestinian Authority, was immediately turned over by Israel. So, according to this interpretation, which is the authoritative interpretation of 242, Israel has never been out of compliance with 242, and the Arab states are still out of compliance with 242, though Egypt and Jordan are now in general compliance with 242, and there's been a reciprocity, there's been a land for peace. But there has been no obligation to return lands captured by from Syria, because Syria has not made a peace with Israel, and indeed, technically, really no obligation even to return lands to Egypt and Jordan, because 242 contemplated complete recognition by all the Arab countries as a condition to the return of any land. Now, even when the Arab states fully and completely comply with their obligations under 242, which I emphasize has not occurred, there still is no obligation on the part of Israel under 242 to return all the lands. And this is the part of the resolution that I was involved in and that my advice was sought on and that I overheard and participated as a silent person in conversations. And that is the debate over whether the resolution would contain the words, as the Russians wanted them to, the Soviets wanted them to, all territories, or as the French wanted them to, the territories, using the definite article in French. And Justice Goldberg, Ambassador Goldberg, and Lord Kerrigan and the United States firmly rejected that interpretation and the inclusion of those words. Indeed, after an agreement was reached that the word all or the word though would not be included, some member states of the United Nations said, well, we're going to interpret it to include the words the or the words all, and British Ambassador Lord Kerrigan firmly declared after the vote, it is only the resolution that will bind us, and we regard its wording as clear. And when he was asked to explain the position later, Lord Kerrigan was as clear as it could be. Quote, it would have been wrong to demand that Israel return to its position of June 4th, 1967, because those positions were undesirable and artificial. You'll recall the famous phrase that Avi Eben used. He described the 1949 lines as the Auschwitz lines, the lines that left Israel vulnerable to the attacks that precipitated the war of 1967.